He thought he'd landed in Singapore, but the city was only wearing a mask, and behind that mask, something was waiting for him, a child with a torch. Crawling from every corner of the world, come the stories that should never be told, creepy stories from around the world. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It truly helps us make more of this type of content. James Ruddock pressed his forehead against the window as the plane began its descent. Beneath him, Singapore glittered in the humid night, a sprawl of neon arteries and faintly glowing haze. He had dreamed of this moment for weeks. New job, new country, a clean slate after years of feeling suffocated in England. He closed his eyes, breathing in the recycled air, trying to steady himself. This is it, a chance to start over. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are making our final approach into Singapore Changi Airport. Local time is 7:45 p.m. Weather is clear. James fastened his seatbelt. Around him, passengers shuffled with warily, heads bent over phones or half-read magazines. Everything was ordinary. Then the light came. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't anything natural. A white-hot brilliance swallowed the cabin, erasing faces, shapes, even sound. James cried out, blinded, his body seizing against the seatbelt. For a heartbeat, or maybe an eternity, there was nothing but whiteness. And then, as suddenly as it came, the light was gone. The plane dipped, wheels screeching against the tarmac. The cabin jolted with landing as though nothing had happened. James blinked furiously, his eyes watering. Had no one else seen it? He followed the line of passengers into the arrival hall. Changi Airport looked wrong. It had all the right elements. Marble floors polished to a gleam, indoor gardens blooming with orchids. But everything seemed slightly off, as though built from memory rather than reality. The orchids pulsed faintly, like breathing lungs. The glass walls rippled as though underwater. Most disturbing of all were the people. They walked in orderly lines, pulling suitcases, chatting softly, but their movements were stiff, repetitive, like mannequins wound on invisible springs. A man in a business suit laughed, the sound too perfect, and then repeated the exact laugh 2 steps later, identical in every pitch and cadence. James slowed, heart hammering. No one else sees this? A stewardess at the gate gave him a smile that didn't move her eyes. Her lips stretched too wide, almost tearing. "Welcome to Singapore, Mr. Ruddock," she said. He had never told her his name. The city outside was worse. Taxi drivers waited at the curb, their faces shadowed, their smiles frozen. The skyline glowed a deep, feverish red, neon signs bleeding into the smog. James took a cab. The driver said nothing, only drove, eyes fixed forward, hands gripping the wheel as if nailed there. Out the window, the city warped. MRT stations appeared twice, then vanished. Streets curved back on themselves. Hawker stalls steamed with food that writhed faintly on the plates. Cats prowled the alleys with human eyes, watching. James pressed a hand to the glass, whispering, "What the hell is happening?" The driver did not answer. He stumbled into his assigned apartment, a bland unit in an anonymous high-rise, and locked the door. The silence inside was worse. The refrigerator hummed in a low, pulsing rhythm, almost like breathing. The wallpaper seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at it. James sat on the couch, clutching his head. He told himself it was exhaustion, jet lag, a trick of the light. But then he saw it again. Across the street, a window flared with blinding brilliance, the same searing white as on the plane. For an instant, he thought he saw a silhouette, a child holding a torch, its beam impossibly strong. The light blinked out. James was left alone in the silence, his chest heaving. He knew then with cold certainty, he had not arrived in Singapore. Not really. Something else had taken him, something that wore the city like a mask. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the memory of that blinding flash returned. Pure white swallowing the plane, burning through skin and bone, leaving him hollow. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of corridors that bent back on themselves, lined with doors that breathed. At dawn, or what passed for dawn in this place, he rose and stared out at the city. The sky was a dull gray, neither day nor night. The skyline beyond was fractured. Skyscrapers leaning at impossible angles, some half dissolved into mist. Yet below, traffic flowed smoothly. Hundreds of commuters walked in precise lines, none looking up, none breaking step. James whispered, "This isn't real." but it felt real. The air was hot and sticky against his skin, thick with the scent of diesel and rain. He forced himself into the streets. If this was madness, then he had to walk through it. If it was real, he had to find a way back. The first stop was the MRT. The entrance yawned wide, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. He descended into the station and stopped. On the opposite platform stood dozens of people waiting for a train. Each of them was identical, same suit, same briefcase. Their faces were blank, as if painted on. The train shrieked into the station, its windows black. The doors hissed open. The passengers stepped on in unison, movements synchronized. Not one glanced at James. The doors closed. The train departed without a sound. The opposite platform was empty. James staggered back up the stairs, bile rising in his throat. The city bled into itself as he walked. He found himself on Orchard Road, then blinked, and he was in Little India. He turned a corner and was suddenly at Marina Bay, skyscrapers looming overhead. The streets folded like paper, rearranging themselves each time he looked away. Hawker stalls steamed with food, but the dishes writhed. A bowl of noodles squirmed as if alive. A roasted chicken flexed its claws when James passed. He fled, clutching his stomach. In an alley, cats sat rows, dozens of them, staring with eyes that glowed faintly green. Their gaze followed him as he stumbled past. One opened its mouth and whispered in a child's voice, "Go back." James ran. By evening, he was shaking, sweat dripping down his spine. He collapsed on a bench outside a shopping mall, clutching his head. People flowed around him, endless rivers of mannequins in business suits and dresses. None looked at him. None acknowledged him, until one did. A woman stopped in front of him. She was young, pale-haired, clutching a camera bag against her side. Her eyes were wide, frantic, human. "You see it too," she whispered. James blinked. His throat was dry. "The wrongness?" She nodded sharply, relief flooding her face. "Thank God, I thought I was alone." Her name was Anya, a backpacker from Russia. She told him her story in a rush. A flight into Singapore, the blinding light, waking in a warped city where no one else seemed aware. "I asked them questions," she said, voice shaking. "They only smiled at me. Or stopped moving. Just froze, like dolls with their strings cut." James felt a wave of sick relief. He wasn't mad, or at least, if he wasn't alone. They sat in silence, the mall lights flickering above. Somewhere deep in the building, a loudspeaker droned in a language James couldn't recognize. Too fast, too many syllables, words that twisted as they echoed. The sound made his teeth ache. As they left the mall together, James saw it again. Across the atrium by the escalator, a figure stood watching them. A child. Small, its face obscured by the beam of a torch. The light was impossibly bright, stabbing through the haze. The child tilted its head. The light blinked out. When James looked again, the escalator was empty. Anya grabbed his arm. Her hand was ice cold. "You saw that, didn't you?" James swallowed. "Yes." That night, James and Anya sheltered in a half-abandoned food court. The neon sign above flickered irregularly, casting everything in sickly green. They huddled against the wall, too afraid to sleep. The city hummed around them. Somewhere outside, rain fell, whispering secrets neither of them wanted to hear. James thought of England, of his old life, of how ordinary things had once seemed. And he realized he might never see it again. The food court smelled of mildew and stale grease. Somewhere in the dark, a fan clicked endlessly, its blades never moving. James sat with his back to the wall, knees drawn up, watching the entrance. Anya had finally dozed off, her head resting on her camera bag. Her face looked fragile in the buzzing green light, lips twitching faintly as though she dreamed of unpleasant things. James couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified. The dripping of a pipe, the far-off shuffle of unseen feet, the faint electrical hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He thought of the figure on the escalator, the child, the way the light had cut through the shadows, searching. He hadn't seen a face. Maybe there wasn't one. When the first shouts came, James thought he was dreaming. A voice, thin but insistent, echoed from the far side of the food court. "Over here!" James jerked upright. Anya stirred, blinking. The voice came again. "This way, quickly." They followed the sound through a service corridor littered with broken trays and overturned chairs. The air was damp and smelled faintly of rust. In a side passage, they found him, an old man on a bench, as though he had been waiting for them all along. His shirt was rumpled, his walking stick leaned against his knee. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert. When he saw them, he smiled. Not the mannequin smile James had grown to fear, but tired, human, genuine. "I was wondering how long it would take you," the man said. His voice was low, gravelly, but steady. James froze. Who are you?" The old man inclined his head. "Tan. Just Tan. I've been here a long time." Mr. Tan led them back through the corridors, his stick tapping rhythmically on the tiles. "I was a teacher once," he said conversationally, as though they weren't wading through nightmare. "Civics, literature, that was years ago. Here, time doesn't keep straight lines." "How long?" Anya asked. Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. Mr. Tan smiled sadly. "Long enough to forget how old I should be. Long enough to know the rules." James's stomach nodded. "Rules?" Tan stopped, resting on his stick. His eyes grew grave. "This place is a reflection. Not Singapore, not exactly. A skin stretched over something else. The light opens the door. If you saw it, then you were caught, pulled through." "The torch," James whispered. Tan nodded once. "Yes, the child, the torch bearer. It hunts the ones who don't belong." That night, they camped together in what had once been a bookstore. The shelves were warped, the books swollen with damp. Some of the pages whispered faintly when touched, voices too low to make out. They took turns keeping watch. During his shift, James asked, "Is there a way back?" Tan didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the window, where faint lights drifted like lanterns in the distance. At last he said, "There is always a way, but it is not free. You must give something to leave. Most who try never find their way out." He looked directly at James, and his voice dropped lower. "Ask yourself if you want to go back at all. Once you've seen behind the skin of the world, can you really return to ignorance?" James shivered. The next day, Tan showed them more of the city's traps. They saw an escalator that rose endlessly into blackness, carrying mannequins upward, their faces blank. None returned. They walked through rain that whispered their sins. Anya wept silently, covering her ears as voices from her childhood hissed through the drops. James heard his ex-wife's voice, sharp and bitter, accusing him of every failure. "Don't listen," Tan warned. "That is how it feeds." At a junction, they passed a bus stop. A crowd of mannequin people boarded an empty bus. As the doors closed, James saw there was no driver. Only rows of passengers, mouths open in identical grins, staring straight ahead. The bus pulled away silently, its wheels never touching the ground. That night, as they huddled in the ruins of an old cinema, James dreamed of the torchbearer again. He stood on the plane alone. The other passengers were frozen mid-breath, faces turned blank. The child stood at the far end of the aisle, its torch burning brighter than any sun. James tried to move, but his limbs were heavy. The child lifted the torch, and light swallowed everything. When he woke, Anya was shaking him. "You were screaming," she whispered. James lay trembling, sweat soaking his shirt. Outside, in the endless twilight, a single light flickered on the horizon, blinking in irregular rhythm, like a beacon calling to them. Tan's face was grim. "Don't look at it. Don't ever follow the lights." The beacon on the horizon pulsed through the night like a heartbeat. James couldn't stop staring. It blinked irregularly, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, but always too bright, too sharp. Every time it flared, he felt it burning behind his eyelids. Anya sat across from him in the ruins of the cinema, her face drawn. "It looks like a signal," she whispered. "Maybe it's others, survivors." "No," Mr. Tan's voice was firm, even angry. "That is how it calls you. It takes your shape, your memories, uses them to lure you closer. If you follow, you do not return." But the light kept pulsing, and with every beat, James felt something inside him loosening, like a hook tugging at the base of his skull. They moved again the next morning, Tan insisting they stay ahead of the sweepers, though he never explained what those were. The city folded in on itself as usual, streets leading nowhere, buildings repeating, malls that seemed to grow like tumors from one another. James grew weaker each day. His skin felt stretched thin, like parchment. His reflection, when he caught it in broken glass, seemed blurred at the edges, as though he were fading. That evening, as they rested in an underground walkway, Anya suddenly stiffened. "Do you hear that?" she asked. James strained. At first he heard nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of a child laughing, high and shrill, echoing through the tunnel. Anya rose, clutching her camera bag. "It's coming from over there." Tan grabbed her wrist sharply. "No, don't." But already James saw it. At the far end of the tunnel, a small figure holding a torch. The beam cut through the gloom, dazzling. The child tilted its head. The light flared. Anya tore free from Tan's grip. "It's my brother," she cried. "I see him! He's calling me!" James lunged for her. "Anya, no!" But she was already running, her footsteps echoing. The light engulfed her. When it faded, the tunnel was empty. Silence stretched, heavy as stone. James stood shaking, his hands still outstretched. His stomach twisted with guilt, horror, grief. Tan placed a hand on his shoulder, his face grim. It was never her brother. It was the torchbearer. It finds what you love most and wears it like a mask. That's how it feeds. James staggered back against the wall, bile rising in his throat. "We should have stopped her." "You cannot stop the willing," Tan said quietly. "She chose." That night, the torch returned. James woke to find the light flooding through the broken cinema doors. The child stood there, torch raised, face hidden in brilliance. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it moved shapes, faceless figures, skin like wax, walking in perfect synchronization. Their heads twitched in unison, tracking him. Tan rose, gripping his stick like a weapon. "Run," he told James. "What about you?" Tan's expression was unreadable. "I've been here too long. Maybe this is my time." Before James could protest, Tan limped toward the light. The child tilted its head, torch flaring. The figures turned to him. "Go," Tan roared. His voice cracked, but his eyes burned with defiance. James hesitated one last second, then ran, heart hammering, the sound of Tan's stick echoing behind him, followed by silence. He didn't stop running until his lungs felt torn. He stumbled into a deserted terminal, collapsing against a row of seats. His chest heaved, his vision blurred. He was alone. Anya was gone. Tan was gone. Only James remained, trembling in the skeletal airport. Above him, the intercom crackled. A child's voice whispered through the static, "You cannot hide, you are mine." The lights flickered, each bulb flaring into a tiny torch. James pressed his palms over his ears, curling in on himself. He wanted to vanish, to peel his skin away and escape. But in his heart, he knew. The only way out was back where it began. Back to the plane. James wandered for what felt like days. The city twisted tighter, folding inward like a clenched fist. Roads dead-ended into walls of glass. Buildings leaned, groaning, their windows like watching eyes. The sky never changed. Gray twilight pressed down, heavy and suffocating. He walked until his feet bled, until every step was a prayer. And then, without warning, he saw it. The airport. It rose from the mist exactly as it had when he arrived. Polished marble, towering glass, orchids blooming too brightly. Only now it looked emptier. The mannequins moved slower, their faces sagging as though their masks were slipping. James knew, with a certainty that made his bones ache, that this was his last chance. Inside, the terminal was silent. The flight information boards flickered, letters bleeding into shapes that weren't words. Gates stretched in endless rows. And at the far end, he saw it, the plane, his plane. Through the glass wall, it sat waiting on the tarmac. Passengers filed aboard in neat, endless lines. James's chest tightened. His heart screamed, "That's the way back." He forced himself forward, every step heavier than the last. As he reached the gate, he froze. There, standing in the jet bridge, was the child, torch in hand, beam blazing white. The figure did not move. It only tilted its head as though curious. The torchlight flared and James saw faces in it. Anya's, pale and pleading. Mr. Tan's, lined and weary. A dozen others, people he didn't know. All of them mouthing the same word, "Stay." James clenched his fists. "No." His voice was hoarse, raw. "I'm going back." The light flared, swallowing the gate. James ran through it. He was back on the plane. Passengers stirred around him, fastening seatbelts, checking phones. The cabin lights glowed softly. The engines whined as they taxied. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Singapore. Local time is 7:45 p.m. We hope you enjoyed your flight." James sat frozen, drenched in sweat. His hands shook violently against the armrests. Had it been a dream? He turned. The man beside him yawned, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. A child laughed 2 rows back. James flinched, whipping around. It was just a boy shining a small torch against the ceiling. The beam flickered, white hot. James's blood ran cold. Hours later, they found him. He was raving, shouting about the wrong city and the child with the torch. Airport staff held him down until security arrived. Doctors called it acute psychosis. likely stress-induced. He was sedated, shipped back to England, committed. In the institution, James sat in his padded room, whispering to himself. No one believed him. How could they? No time had passed. To everyone else, it had been a normal flight. The psychiatrists smiled their patient smiles, making notes as he insisted he had lived days, weeks in another place. A reflection of Singapore, a city wearing its own skin inside out. He told them about Anya, about Mr. Tan, about the torch. They nodded. They wrote. They left. That night, James lay in the dark, the hum of lights above his cell buzzing in his ears. Sleep came slowly, uneasy, shallow. He woke to a sound, a scrape, a shuffle. Light seeped under the door, thin, white, possibly bright. A child's voice whispered, soft as breath. You never left. The torch clicked on, the cell dissolved into white. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It truly helps us make more of this type of content.